Passive investing is really just one idea. Own the whole market, weight it by the size of each company, and then don't trade. That's it. And it's been an idea that's been around for decades now. The first exchange-traded fund, or ETF, launched on the American Stock Exchange in January 1993, and that was after a 3-year collaboration between State Street and the exchange. But it wasn't built for people like us. It was actually built for institutions to trade with. And the man who ran that launch later said, "Boy, we were wrong." So we've got an old idea sitting inside a wrapper that was designed for somebody else entirely, and I think that raises a fair question. Is it past it? Because the modern version almost writes itself. Artificial intelligence reads the company fundamentals, a trading app buys you fractional slices of every stock in your AI bespoke index, and it does that for almost nothing. So you set your own rules and you generate out performance with no manager and no manager fee. So by the end of this, you'll know whether that's feasible, and you'll also know what your fund does for you behind the scenes that you'd be giving up. So let's start with the wrapper, because the word ETF has drifted furthest of all. It stands for Exchange Traded Fund, and it's a fund that you can trade on an exchange and nothing more. But in our heads, it's actually come to mean something different, which is passive. Europe's markets regulator, ESMA, has had to require an actively managed ETF to say so in plain terms in its prospectus. And I'd say a rule like that only exists because the wrapper was misleading people. The wrapper now carries leveraged funds, inverse funds, and single stock products too. Now these are trading tools, and some are built to be held for a single day and then sold. And if you want to know why we have diversification rules at all, Korea ran the experiment for us this year. Korea had a rule of its own requiring an ETF to hold at least 10 different things with a 30% cap on any one of them. They scrapped it with effect from 28th of April 2026. Single stock leverage products launched in late May, and within weeks they'd taken in more than $10 billion, almost all of it betting on 2 chip makers. And those two aren't some corner of the market. Samsung Electronics on its own is more than a third of the Korean index, and SK Hynix more than a quarter. So a leveraged bet on 2 companies was, in effect, a leverage bet on the whole market. Within 7 weeks, the regulator had suspended all new listings, banned the advertising, and tightened the rules again. And it wasn't enough. The Kospi fell more than 15% in 2 trading days and finished July down by about a third. The leveraged funds lost more than 2/3 of their assets. The head of the financial supervisor publicly expressed regret for approving them, and this is the part I find most telling. Foreign investors had already been selling Korean stocks for months because that rally had pushed those 2 companies into the concentration limits inside the big indices. Now, those rules were doing exactly what they were built to do. Korea drew one more conclusion, which I think is telling. These products now have to describe themselves as single stock, leverage, or inverse instead of ETF. So the label tells you the wrapper, it doesn't tell you the strategy. And once you've seen that happen to 3 letters, ETF, it's worth asking what happened to the word passive. Before we get to what any of this means for what you actually hold, I'd like to talk about the sponsor of today's video, Trading 212. I've been using Trading 212 Stocks and Shares ISA for several years, and I love it. It charges no account fees, no subscription fees, and it offers over 13,000 ETFs and stocks. My favorite Trading 212 feature is pies. You can build a self-contained portfolio inside your Stocks and Shares ISA, set it once, and then rebalance with just one click. You can drip feed into it with regular investing and reinvest dividends automatically. Their ISA is also flexible, which means you can withdraw cash within the tax year and put it back without affecting that year's ISA allowance. As a viewer of PensionCraft, you get a special offer from Trading 212 where you can claim free fractional shares worth up to £100. Just open an account, verify it, fund it, and then use my name as the promo code RAMIN, RAMIN, and you'll find a link to that in the description below. Now let's turn to the word passive itself, because I think its meaning has changed beyond recognition. Strictly speaking, passive just means a fund tracks an index. That's it. But most people hear passive and think it means something neutral, owning the whole market, weighted by size, nobody making any kind of judgment call. And those two things have drifted a long way apart. Let's start with weighting. A factor fund is technically passive, but isn't weighted by company size at all. It's an active bet on value or quality delivered by a rule instead of a manager, and rules cost money to follow. One study based on decades of US data found that equal weighting runs roughly 6 times the turnover of a cap-weighted portfolio. That means more trading costs, of course. And even a plain tracker isn't purely weighted by size, because the rules won't let it be. Under UCITS, which is the European rulebook that almost every fund sold to UK investors is built under, a fund can't track an index where one company's impact breaks the 20% and 35% diversification limits. Now that's a UCITS rule. If you've got a fund which is domiciled elsewhere, like the US, that would answer to a different rule book. Then there's the index itself, which is a product created by an index provider company and then licensed to fund managers. FTSE Russell says its governance board approves all new methodologies and enhancements to existing methodologies. MSCI describes its committees as being there to ensure that decisions are not made unilaterally. So there's judgment in there. Published judgment, of course, but judgment nonetheless. And sometimes the manager owns the index. VanEck's semiconductor ETF tracks a market vector index. And market vector is the exclusive property of Market Vector Indexes GmbH, a wholly owned subsidiary of VanEck Associates Corporation. Now that's all perfectly legal and it's disclosed, but the rule writer and the fund manager are, figuratively speaking, in the same building. Now let's think about the other direction. There are active funds that have copied the best habits of passive investing while tracking no index at all. As things stand in 2026, Avantis's global equity ETF charges 0.22% a year. Dimensional's global core equity ETF charges 0.26%. Now both of those are systematic rather than discretionary, and both are broadly diversified. As Avantis puts it, our strategies are low turnover, so that minimizes the amount of trading that you have. Now let's put those against a vanilla global tracker at 0.14%. Traditional active equity funds average 1.28% across the EU in 2024. So while these funds are priced like trackers, they're legally active. Dimensional says so outright. The fund is not managed in reference to a benchmark. So those were active funds that captured some of the best aspects of passive. There are also active funds that do the opposite. Active fees for passive performance. ESMA calls this closet indexing, and I quote, "Investors are being misled about a fund's investment strategy and objective. Somewhere between 5% and 11% of funds calling themselves active were statistically just trackers, and that's based on European data running to 2018. None of that tells you what you actually own. So let's take the thing most people worry about, which is concentration. If you own a global tracker, you probably own well over 1,400 companies. But on a measure taken in 2024, it behaved as though you only owned about 104 of them. Now that's VanEck's own number, and they sell equal weight funds, so it isn't a neutral source. But in the US, the top 10 constituents of the S&P 500 were more than a third of the whole index at the end of July 2026. The average over the last 45 years is roughly 20%, and the previous peak was around 25%, and that was at the top of the dot-com boom. And the US market on its own is now roughly 62% of the total value of world equities. So that's the worry. But two things are worth saying before we get carried away. Back in 1960, AT&T on its own was about 13% of the entire US market. That's roughly double the biggest stock today. And by international standards, the US isn't the extreme case. Korea's top 10 are more than 3/4 of its index, for example. So what's unusual isn't any one company, it's how much the top handful adds up to. Now that might also be unwinding now. So through early July 2026, the Magnificent 7 index had gained just 0.5% over the course of the year. The rest of the S&P 500 was up 13% over the same period. So perhaps nature is already healing. Now here's a cost that never shows up on your statement. When a company gets added to an index, everybody knows in advance. The date is actually published, and every tracker fund following that index has to buy that stock on that day, because that's what tracking means. So the market gets there first. The price moves before your fund does, and your fund still buys because it has no choice. Gerard O'Reilly, who co-runs Dimensional, puts the important part simply. He says, that does not mean that you've had zero trading costs because your trading costs have been built into the index return. In other words, this cost is material, but it's buried inside the index's own performance rather than in the fee that you compared. Your fund tracked perfectly, it just tracked something that had already cost you money. Now, we saw a live example of this with a SpaceX listing, and I'll link that video below. But the general point is the one that really matters here, and I think it's a single best explanation for why some funds now deliberately refuse to track an index at all. Now let's come back to where we started. We combine artificial intelligence, company data, and a free trading platform. And some people describe this as direct indexing, where you're essentially rolling your own index. And why wouldn't that beat a fund? Because to beat a cap-weighted fund, your system has to do all of the following at once. It has to identify a mispricing, something the rest of the market has priced wrongly, not just a pattern in the numbers. It has to scale. A mispricing in one small company is no use to you if you can only get a few £100 into it. It has to trade cheaply because every rebalance pays a spread and nudges the price against you. It has to avoid overfitting. Tune a model until it looks convincing on past data, and what you've built is a description of the past rather than a prediction of the future, and a model will hallucinate. It'll hand you a confident, fluent, completely wrong answer about a company's accounts. And nothing in the way it says it will tell you which kind of answer you just got. It has to survive a change in regime. The relationships it learned from the past aren't promised to hold in the future. And after all of that, after fees and after tax, it still has to beat a fund that charges almost nothing and does none of this. Now that's a lot of things you have to get right. Beating the market is not easy, whether you're a human or an AI. And then there's everything a fund does that you have to do yourself. You'll never trade on the terms which an institution gets. And even a cap-weighted portfolio has to trade when companies join and leave the index. Your positions have to be big enough to be worth trading in the first place, and even with fractional shares, the smallest holdings in a cap-weighted portfolio are absolutely tiny next to the largest. Every time a dividend lands, an accumulating fund puts it straight back to work as part of its dealing schedule carried out by its operations team. Now, you may be sitting on cash until there's enough to make a trade cost effective. Then when a company you own gets taken over, you have to decide whether to keep the buyer's shares or sell them. And that's a decision you're forced to make, often with a deadline. And you'll need to rebalance from time to time, which again costs you money. Now, a fund does all of that for you, at institutional cost. And that's a lot of work being done for a very small fee. So I'd say what's most likely is a checkbox and slider exercise in the future where you make small tilts away from market cap weighting. I don't like this kind of company, so exclude it. I want less of this country and more of that one. And in a general investment account, automated tax loss harvesting could add a bit of return too. But if you tilt too far from market cap weighting, well, then you could underperform. So is passive investing finished? Well, no. I think the changes are actually quite positive for investors as long as you use them correctly. So, on the one hand, you've got the core global and developed equity funds and the bond funds as well getting cheaper all the time as these huge fund managers compete with one another. So that's now pushed the cheapest all world tracker, the kind that holds emerging markets too, down to 0.07% a year. Now that's a wonderful thing. But then we have a huge tail of exotic funds which blur the boundaries between active and passive. Now that gives us more choice, but not always a helpful choice. If you can't sum up what your fund is adding to your portfolio in one sentence, then it probably doesn't have a place. And cap weighting has one property that nothing else has. It's the only rule that needs almost no trading at all. Prices move, weights move with them, and the portfolio looks after itself. Every alternative, equal weight, fundamental weight, your own clever tilt, has to be traded to stay where it is, and every trade costs you. And that's why the boring one keeps winning, not because it's clever, but because it doesn't have to do anything. Let me know in the comments if you think AI and direct indexing will change the game, and this is the end for passive investing. And if you'd like to go deeper on this with us, here's a link to our membership. And, as always, thank you for listening.